Going on now to topic 2 of chapter 2, circles. Now in lesson 1 of chapter 2, we went over the diagonal formula and also the midpoint formula. And we're now going to introduce the formulas for a circle. And I know many of you know parts of a circle, but let's just do a little review here. And we're going to develop what is called the standard form of the equation of a circle. So let's pause and look at this and a few things that you already know. So there was our center of the circle here, and a point from the center of the circle to its outer edge, which we say is the circumference, is the radius. But if from the edge of the circle we draw a perpendicular line to our center of a circle, notice what we get here. We're getting this point, and these are x values, rise over run, and these are y values. And our diagonal in the previous lesson is now the radius of a circle. So how would we find this radius? Well, we would use the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So if we squared this, and if we had this value here that we're going to square, and this value here that we're going to square, we would find the actual numbers that we could put into our circle formula. So keeping in mind that our center of the circle is designated by the letters H, K, where H is an X value, K is a Y value, and then we've found the length of our run, our X values, by subtracting this point from the center of the circle and the Y values by doing something similar, and keeping in mind our diagonal formula from an earlier lesson, where the D we now know is the R, and if we take away the radical sign, it makes the R then squared. This becomes the standard form of a circle, where H is the X value of the center of the circle, K is the Y value of the center of the circle, and R is the radius. So this is an important formula, standard form of a circle. Now in example 1, we're asked to write this data that I've written here into the standard form of a circle. And let's see what that looks like. We'll go to the whiteboard now. And we don't need this. So what is our x? We don't know at this time. Minus h. So minus a -2 will make this a +2. That's squared. And plus y. Now our k value is 7. So the negative in the formula makes this a -7. And our radius is 3. So 3 squared is 9. So we have taken some raw data and put it into the standard form of a circle. Now let's go back. And there we see it. Now in example 2, we're going to use some information from an earlier lesson. We have a circle and we have the endpoints of the circle. So what this represents from one point to another, can you see this is a diameter and these are the endpoints? But we want to find the radius. And then later we're going to be doing this a little bit too. They all kind of tie in. Now, how do we find the radius if we know the diameter? Well, we have to find the midpoint. So that's where we're going with this. So for example 2 now, we have our values for x, a -4 plus 2 divided by 2. Our y values, a -1 and a 5 divided by 2, give us the midpoint of our circle. Remember, this is going to be our h, comma, k in the standard formula. And we could use one of the endpoints. Here I see they're using this endpoint to give us a radius. So -4 minus a -1 now, which makes this a +1, which will make this a -3 that we're going to square for this. And this will be a -1 minus 2, which makes this a -3 that we're going to square. So that gives us a 9 plus 9 is 18. So then putting this into our standard form, and I've written the standard form of the circle here. So our h value is a -1. Putting a -1 there, the opposite of a -1 made it a +1. And then the opposite of 2 made our k value a -2. And we know our r value was, r squared value was 18, and that's what we have. Okay, so again, a lot of math, a lot of arithmetic, but hoping you picked up where things go and how we got them. Now in example 3, we're taking a look at a circle and we're asked to write what we see in a standard form of a circle. So let's do some brainstorming and see what we come up with. All right, let's find out what HK would be. And you might say, what is that? Well, that's the center of the circle. So the center of the circle is right here. So this is going to be a -3, comma, -2. Okay. Now, how many units is our radius? Well, here's our radius right here. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the radius is 5. All right, now with that, let's go to the whiteboard and see what we can figure out. So we're going to get x. Now we know our h is a -3. So there's a negative in the formula. So the opposite of -3 makes this a +3. And we know our k is a -2. So the opposite of a -2 is a +2. And we know that our radius is 5. So 5 squared is 25. We have put raw data, again, picking it out of the circle, and we now have it in the standard form of a circle. So let's check out our work here. Go back, and then drop this down, and we'll see how we did. And I think we did very well. There it is here. We're now going to reverse what we've just done. From standard form, we're going to graph a circle. So in example 4, this is our equation in standard form of the circle. So we need to pick out our h, k, and we need to find our radius. So again, studying this, our h, remember, is going to be the opposite sign of this. So that will be a 2. And the opposite sign of this for our y, which will be a -3. So we're going to go to our circle and do -2, or I should say 2, -3. So there's 2, and there's -3. All right, there's our circle. But we don't have our radius. Remember, this is r squared. So we have to take the square root of 4 and get 2. So from here, it'll be 2 this way, and 2 this way, and then 2 this way, and then 2 this way. Now, in the software, you're going to have to put a point on the circle. I'm assuming you drag it out using the circle tool to make your circle. And there it is. Good job. Now, something that I might add here is, what is the domain then in interval notation of our circle? Well, for domain, we're looking for x values, which would be these here, projected to the x-axis, and that would be from 0 to 4, using brackets to indicate that these values are included. the 0 and the 4, and then taking the y values, in a sense this diameter, projecting it to the y-axis. This goes from -5 up to a -1, and both of these points are included. Again, they're not asking for that here, but it's so easy to pass that little bit of knowledge on. Now, as we continue, there's another formula which is called the general form of a circle, where if we're given that, we have to use a technique that's called completing the square to put it into the standard form of the circle. And that's what we're going to illustrate now. And take some good notes on this. Okay, some background information. I don't see this listed here in the lecture notes. It's probably in the textbook, but this is, of course, an outline form. Take a moment to write this down here. This is the general form of a circle. And what we want to do is put this into the standard form of a circle. And there is a protocol for doing this. We're calling it here example 5, graphing circles and completing the square. Now, it's quite a tedious process. I'm going to go to the whiteboard and work it out for you. And here, this is the specific equation they're giving us that I have written up here. And I'll take this away and we'll go to the whiteboard. Again, you can pause this anytime. You can also rewind and review it again. So there it is, the general form of a circle. Now notice what they did is they had this term over on the other side, which is what we're going to do now. Take this and bring it over here as a -1. Now I'm going to take the x term and tie it over here, x squared. Just reposition this, plus 8x. I'm going to leave it like that for a moment. And then I'm going to take my y squared and then move this -2y so that we now have it looking like this. Now, I can put parentheses around certain things here, and I'm going to put a parenthesis around here, and I'm going to put a parenthesis around there. And so far, I have still an equation. I'm just repositioning things. Now, we're going to use this process of what we call completing the square to turn this binomial into a trinomial by getting a term here and getting a term there that will let me get binomials that are squared. And again, that process is called completing the square. But keep in mind, we still have an equation here. So what is the process? Well, again, jumping way down here to give us some room, we have a squared plus b, ax squared plus bx plus c. This is a trinomial that we want to have this become a perfect square trinomial that when it factors, we had back in the earlier part of the lessons, into a binomial that's squared. So what did we do? What was that special process? Well, we said we would get here an x, and then whatever sign is there goes here. And we had to multiply this and double it to get this b term, which is an 8. So to undo the doubling, we're going to divide the 8 by 2. Take half of it, which is 4. Now, to get our c term here, we have to square this term, which becomes a 16. But as soon as I put a 16 there, I don't have an equation anymore. But to keep it an equation, I'm going to put 16 there. So now it's still an equation. Now, the same thing here. This is going to be y. Now, to get our b term from this, we had to multiply these two and then double it. So take half of the b term here. -2 becomes a -1. And to get our c term, we had to square this, which is a 1. But now it's not an equation anymore. But if I add the 1 here, I now have an equation. Just switching things around and using various skills of completing the square. So can you see that these two cancel out? So I can just erase them now. And I ended up with this. And now I have it in the standard form of a circle. Wow. So again, I want to identify my h comma k. And I want to identify my r. So what will the h be here? Again, it's opposite sign. That's going to be a -4. And what will my k be? Opposite sign, a 1. So there's my center of the circle. But what is my r value? Remember that this is r squared. Well, we take the square root of 16 and we get 4. So there are my values. All right, now let's go to the whiteboard, from the whiteboard back, and let's see what they have here. I'll clear this up and we'll go down. Now they're showing you this in some detail. There's your 4, there's your 1, there's your 16. So what is the center of the circle? Well, we said a -4 and a 1, which is going to be right there. And what was our radius? We said our radius was 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's the center of the circle. There's the radius. And we've drawn our circle starting with the general form of the circle using completing the square. And this is quite challenging. And that will wind up this lesson.